Yeah, okay. We'll be beginning in a minute.
And thanks for signing that form. I totally couldn't see.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Okay. Oh, wait. I've got one. Oh, perfect. It's perfect. Oh, maybe that one's a little more complete, but that's okay. It's the same. Yeah, I think it's the same. She was just holding my. Oh, yes, if you can just sign the mileage she signed. Oh. Yeah. Thank you. Are we ready to go then? I think so. All right. All right, I think we still need another minute.
They're ready.
Thumbs up?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the SANDAG Sustainable Communities Working Group meeting of June 20th, 2024. And I apologize for the slight delay getting going, but here we are, we're ready to go. I'm your chair, Joy Lines. I'm the city council member for the city of Encinitas. So we'd like to begin. I'll pass it over to our interpreter for today's meeting, who will provide an explanation of how to use the interpretation devices or access interpretation online.
Good afternoon. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, which is the world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish in the background. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Tessa, our clerk, to perform the roll call and confirm that we have a quorum, please.
Good afternoon. City of Carlsbad, Rob Efford.
Here.
City of Chula Vista, Todd Phillips.
Here.
City of Coronado, Jesse Brown.
Here.
County of San Diego, Tara Lieberman. City of Del Mar, Karen Brindley. City of El Cajon, Nora Alvey. City of Encinitas, Patty Anders. City of Escondido, Imperial Beach, La Mesa, and Lemon Grove are absent. City of National City, Carlos Aguirre.
Here.
City of Imperial Beach is here.
Is Megan Openshaw?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, your name was highlighted, but not, I didn't have your signature. So City of Imperial Beach is present. City of National City, Carlos Aguirre.
Here again.
City of Oceanside, Darlene Nicandro. Are you present? Is absent. City of Poway is absent. City of San Diego, Heidi Von Bloom.
I'm present.
City of San Marcos and City of Santee are absent. City of Solana Beach, Joseph Lynn.
Present.
City of Vista is absent, and I believe we have one advisory member, the San Diego County Local Agency Formation Commission, that is present, and that confirms a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to review the meeting process for both the working group members as well as for the public who wish to participate. And so that's just a reminder for the working group members that if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Tessa, can you provide a quick reminder of how the public comments will work?
For those of you who would like to make a public comment on any agenda item, if you are in the room, please complete a speaker slip and bring it to me for each item that you would like to speak on. And if you are virtual, please raise your hand at the time the item is called and prior to the end of the presentation. I'll call on those public members in person first and then those virtually.
Thank you very much. So before we begin, do any members of the working group have any questions before we continue? Seeing none, we'll go to item 1, which is non-agenda public comments and member comments. Do we have any working group member comments on non-agenda items today?
Sure, I would.
Yes.
And I may be jumping the gun a little bit here as it relates to staff announcements, but when reviewing the agenda on here, I saw that we don't have any updates on the regional plan for the processes that we've been talking about recently. And in the last meeting, I had requested that we get some more data before that data goes to the board, specifically about the population per jurisdiction, as well as the GHG modeling results. And so I understand that it is going to be going to the board. So we'll let staff respond to that. But I just think we're missing a key opportunity for this working group to weigh in and to provide some technical expertise on some of the outputs of all that we've been working on. And SANDAG's been great about providing us opportunities for input. I know my staff have, spent hours providing the input. So it'd be great to see the outcomes of that before, and potentially even provide a recommendation before that would go to the board. So I just would hate to miss that opportunity. And then more of a parliamentary recommendation as well. It would be great if we could see draft agendas before they are finalized, just so that we can contact staff and potentially propose agenda items so that we don't miss a meeting if something's of interest sooner than later.
All right, thank you for those comments. Noted, and I'll speak for staff and say noted. Since it's not an agenda item, we won't discuss it at this time. Unless
I do have an announcement about that.
Okay.
Just a quick item.
Okay, it can be covered in then the staff reporting, brief announcements and reminders, and so it would be covered in that section. Let me just first ask if there are any public comments on item number 1.
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yes. So, I think it's important as we talk about sustainable communities to understand all of the people coming across the border are going to keep us from being able to have sustainable communities when we have such an influx in human beings that are going to need resources when we're already in a deficit and already struggling just to provide for the people that have already been here. And as more and more people cross the border, and need more and more resources that the people in the communities aren't even getting, that they're actually just, trying to get, whether it be 3 meals a day or shelter or transportation. These people are going to come in, and they have been taking homes and different things that the people here have been waiting for a very long time. So as you sit and want to talk about those things, I think you need to be considering the fact that there is a huge influx of millions, tens of millions of people that are coming across that are going to affect our ability to be sustainable.
Thank you. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you very much. Now we will jump to still in item 1, SANDAG staff update, and that will be Sarah Toma and Stacy Cooper.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. My first announcement is that we have a joint PAC meeting tomorrow. It's for our transportation regional. It's the Transportation, Regional Planning, and Borders Committee, where staff will discuss the health and safety policy area in our 2025 regional plan. It also will cover flex fleet pilot projects and an emergent flex fleet model called Advanced Air Mobility. And then for our regional plan update, so the regional planning team is still in the process of modeling the initial concept. The goal is to bring an update to the board next month, pending the availability of the model results. And since there's no Sustainable Communities Working Group meeting in July, the team will share the meeting agenda and material with the working group members once it's posted, so that the group can have the information at the same time as the board. And staff is also exploring dates to hold sub-regional briefings once the modeling results become available, to share with you and any of the technical, with you and any of your technical staff who would like to participate. And then more information to come on the date over the next couple of weeks. And then if you have availability, we do encourage that you tune in into both the joint PAC meeting tomorrow, which will feature discussion on the 2 policy areas of the regional plan. Again, it's the public health and Vision Zero with flex fleets to listen in on these important updates. And then with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy Cooper, who will give us an update.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, in January with the draft governor's budget, the REAP funding, REAP 2.0, was cut by about a half, which caused us to have to pull back on a lot of our housing programs, including our HAP Cycle 2. So with the new budget that was just put on the governor's desk, they're restoring the majority of that REAP funding. So we're waiting till the governor actually signs that bill. But if he does and it moves forward as we think it will, we will be restoring the HAP Cycle 2 grants. So we'll be touching base with all the jurisdictions who are awarded to talk to you about your projects and to see how we can move forward. But again, fingers crossed still, we're waiting for the signature.
Before we leave this agenda item, I would like to loop back around again to see if the working group have any questions or comments on the staff presentation. Is staff able to give any feedback on the questions that were brought forward as far as the regional plan, other than what's been presented? And so the shake of the head is no at this time. Noted though, and draft agendas before final agendas. I'll just simply ask a question. Is there a precedent for that with the working groups at SANDAG for draft agendas before final?
Well, I'll have to check.
We'll get back.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Moving on to agenda item 2. This is the approval of the minutes, and we will now proceed to approving the consent agenda, which includes item 2. Item 2 is the April 18th meeting minutes. Do we have any comments from the public on item 2?
Thank you, Chair. We have a public member. The original draw, please go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about conservation planning and habitat and what the 25 years of doing that. It's billions of dollars that have been spent on preserving land and pretending to mitigate the habitat and all of this wildlife and different things. But it's sad to see that so many people suffer because we're not able to provide the community and the people with the things they need. but we'll spend billions of dollars on other things that, don't actually move the needle forward for the people. And it's really sad to see that because we shouldn't be sacrificing the people over the planet. And that's what tends to happen. And, it's pretty unfortunate, but it's something that until we understand that all of this is really not to save the planet, but it's to get people in densely populated areas and control their movements, then you're going to continue to do this. But, we should be taking those billions of dollars and putting it towards our communities and helping them.
Your time expired, and that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Are there any working group member comments on item 2? And seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, including item 2?
So moved. For
Solana Beach,
approval.
and then a second.
Second.
Chula Vista, thank you. Will the clerk please call for raised hand vote? Is that what we're doing? Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. Any opposed? Raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously.
Can we ask if there were any abstentions?
Any abstentions? I'm sorry. Yes, there is one. Thank you.
2.
San Diego County, there are 2. And Oceanside? Thank you. All right, item number 3 is Smart Growth Incentive Program, Cycle 6, Call for Projects. I would like to now introduce Jenny Russo, Program Manager, and Stacy Cooper, Senior Regional Planner, who will present an overview of the Smart Growth Incentive Program and request feedback on evaluation criteria and other items for use in the Cycle 6 Call for Projects.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Russo. I'm the Grants Program Manager here at SANDAG. So I oversee all of our competitive grant programs that we have. Today, I'm joined with my colleague, Stacy Cooper. She's in our Sustainable Communities group, and we are here to talk to you about one of our grant programs, the Smart Growth Incentive Program, or SGIP, as we'll talk about it here throughout the presentation. So as a quick agenda, we're going to provide you with an overview of what the program is and what it funds and things like that, followed by some updates that we are proposing to make to the upcoming call for projects. Then we'll detail a little bit closer for you what the evaluation criteria are proposed to be. This is the area where we're really looking for you to provide feedback to us today. And then we'll turn things back over to the chair, and I'm happy to receive any comments that you may have. So as an overview for you, the SGIP is a competitive grant program that we have. It's authored by the Transnet Extension Ordinance. It provides funding for the region's 18 cities in the county of San Diego for transportation-related infrastructure and planning projects. And these are projects that will catalyze compact, mixed-use development that's focused near transit, jobs, services, and public facilities. The intent of the program is to maximize the use of our existing infrastructure to preserve our open space and natural resources, and to increase housing and transportation choice around the region. So we've had 5 prior cycles of the program, beginning with cycle 1 in 2008 and completed the most recent cycle, cycle 5, a couple of years ago in 2022. The amount of funding that we had available in each cycle is shown here on the table on your left. And on the pie chart on the right, you'll see sort of a breakdown about how that funding was distributed. So the majority of it, as you can see, went to capital projects, because that's obviously the greatest need. Folks want to see things that are implemented. But we've also awarded another 12.5 or so million to planning projects. And many of the projects that we see throughout the life of the program that come in on planning, we'll see them continue on through implementation. So sometimes if the planning seems small, you may see that project shift over into capital as well, which is really what this program is intended to do. So we've had more than 70 projects completed throughout our region. This has leveraged an additional 47 million in funding throughout the region. So the total investment that this program has made is about 100 million since the program started in 2008. So a big success story. We've had a whole slew of different types of projects. They're kind of shown here on the left side and the bullets. And to show you sort of visually what some of those projects are, we've kind of highlighted 4 of the most recent projects that were completed here. And I'll turn things over to Stacy and talk about some proposed updates.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so for this cycle, we have up to $35 million available through Transnet. Today, we want to gauge demand for the program, and also we want to hear your feedback and provide some of the feedback that we received from the jurisdictions that we heard back in November. So the biggest concern and barrier is the staff capacity to apply for funding and implement the projects. More specific barriers related to the time for grant administration, grant writing, complicated application process, and schedules for other funding sources. Some repeated project requests and priorities were streetscape improvements, traffic common projects, additional staff to support projects, pedestrian and bike improvements, and planning studies regarding the accelerating of housing development. Some suggestions on opportunities on how SANDAG can support the jurisdictions include technical assistance in meeting the grant requirements, grant writing, resources to understand project costs, and one-on-one consultations with staff. So lastly, some of the things we heard on the application process and the development of the call for projects allowing the jurisdictions to apply for more than one project, reviewing past successful applications, and realistic timelines to execute projects successfully, and a better understanding of how this program can fund a portion of a larger project. So as Jenny mentioned, it's a competitive grant program for local jurisdictions funded through Transnet. In previous cycles, projects had to be in or include a Smart Growth Opportunity Area, or SGOA. With this cycle, we're proposing that we remove that constraint. So instead, projects would need to meet the criteria up on the screen. So advance multimodal transportation, better integrate transportation and land use, demonstrate meaningful reductions to VMT and GHG, advance equity, and align with the 2021 regional plan and SCS. There'll be 3 types of categories that are available: climate action planning to prepare, update CAPs, planning, which includes plans that accelerate smart growth activities, but won't directly result in the construction of a public improvement project, and capital, which will eventually result in the construction of a public improvement project. One thing to note on capital, because we received some feedback from the mobility group, is that projects listed in CAPs as applicable could be used for the capital program. As I mentioned, we have 35 million available, split into 7 million for planning, 3 million for climate action planning, and 25 million for capital. And those are the mins and maxes on the screen, which we'd like your feedback on as well. And then the anticipated timeline. So we held a kickoff event with jurisdiction back in November. This month, we're going to mobility, sustainable communities, and social equity working groups. July through November, we'll be bringing that through iTalk and the PACs. We'll be releasing the call for projects in November with applications due in March or April. And we'll be bringing the funding recommendations back around to the iTalk and the PACs in May through July. And we expect for NTPs to be issued in October. And I will pass it back to Jenny to talk a little bit about evaluation criteria.
All right, so the criteria that we have in the program are mostly derived from the 2021 regional plan and the SCS. So this is the main area that we're looking for your feedback today. So the tables on this slide are the main criteria that we see used most frequently. So for planning and capital projects, these are largely the same as what we've used sort of in previous cycles. We've made some adjustments to some of the weights. What you'll notice is that the main distinction between the two is under the capital. We have an additional subcategory, that's 4A, where we're measuring how the project is moving forward in major milestones. So it's looking at things like, do you have your environmental document? Do you have your right-of-way? You know, are you ready to construct the project, or are you on the earlier phases? That's the only distinction between these two categories. On the climate action planning piece, as Stacy mentioned, the regional plan requires all of our jurisdictions to have an adopted climate action plan in order to be able to receive funding through our grant program. So this program is here, this category is here rather, to allow jurisdictions that have a cap but need to make some updates. They can receive funding for that, or if there's a jurisdiction that doesn't have a climate action plan, they can receive funding through the program to develop that. And they can also receive funding then for implementation projects at the same time. So this is a category we had 2 cycles ago. It worked very well to get a lot of the jurisdictions to be able to fund their climate action plans, which is what we've seen to date. And obviously, as a few years have gone on, things need to change. We're bringing this back for folks that need to make updates to them. So the criteria 1 and 2 are obviously relevant to CAPS in particular, and then criteria 3, there's a number off here, 3, 5, and 6 are the same as what you've seen in the other criteria as well. So they'll largely be measuring the same types of things across the board. Obviously, climate action plans are a little bit different than traditional planning projects or capital, but that's the only main distinction that are happening here. And then board policy 33. So we do have this board policy that outlines how projects that are awarded through the Smart Growth Program receive points related to housing. The program or the policy requires that the program has 25% of the points are allocated through this policy. So if you notice there's 25%, it's pretty high. It's dedicated by this policy that we have to have that criteria and that specific weight. So the points are given out in these 2 subcategories that you see here. So pro-housing policies and housing equity or affirmatively furthering fair housing. In our last 2 cycles of grant programs, we've seen most of the jurisdictions receive primarily, not quite all of the points, but a large volume of them. So this doesn't really distinguish a whole lot who receives funding versus who doesn't, but it's there obviously because we need to have it, but just to kind of give you some background on the policy. And then every 3 years, the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or ITOC, authorizes a performance audit of the Transnet program, including all of our grant programs that are funded through it. So we just completed the most recent triennial performance audit earlier this year. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that audit that have been summarized up here on the slide for you. Most of these are administrative changes that the grant recipient won't see. These are things that we'll be doing myself and my team behind the scenes just to kind of shore up some documentation. But the 2 that I wanted to highlight here that are the most important maybe to share with all of you is performance measures and the more detailed scopes of work. So ITOC is really focused on seeing how projects come in when folks apply, what sort of performance measures are they expecting that money to be used for, and then how will that perform? And then they're looking for us as grant administrators to follow throughout the program and see, are those targets being met? This is pretty comparable to what you see on federal and state programs as well. So it's just something that we're starting to implement here on our local projects as well. And then the detailed scope of work is just providing a larger granular level of detail so that everybody knows between the grantee and SANDAG and somebody external who's not familiar with the project, what is the project expected to deliver so that everybody's on the same page. And then lastly, we do have some other changes that we're proposing to make to just the general process of how the call for projects runs. The main 4 are kind of shown up here on this slide. So the first one is the Transportation Committee is really interested in us having more detailed scoring rubric. So if you've ever looked at another grant program before, sometimes they have a volume of points, say 25 points that are available, but you're not sure, well, how do I get 25 points versus 20 points? This is the intent of a scoring rubric, is it will really tell you specifically how are points derived, and you as the applicant, what would your response need to be to receive that specific number of points? So it helps everybody have the same baseline about what they're achieving. Evaluator consensus is another one that we're moving towards. So all of our evaluators score projects independently. And then when those scores come in, we would meet with that group as a whole and look for outliers in the process. If somebody was scoring, differently than maybe somebody else, and trying to get consensus. Maybe that evaluator just missed something as when they were doing their review, or it could be vice versa. Maybe they caught something very specific that nobody else did. So trying to get everybody sort of on the same page. That leads to the third one, which is averaging those evaluator scores. So to try and help give something meaningful back to someone, we used to use ranking, which is a little bit hard to sort of grasp. We're switching to an average score as well. So you can kind of tell, like, across all of the evaluators, how did someone score? And then lastly is geographic funding distribution. So as Stacy mentioned, we're not limiting the number of applications that somebody can apply for. So the intent of this is to prevent one specific applicant or a number of applicants who put in a large volume of applications from receiving a large amount of that funding. We know because it's a competitive program, sometimes that can be hard for someone who maybe doesn't have the resources to put together a lot of different applications. So the intent here is that we would use those scores. So projects would be listed in order of score, and we would fund the first project from each jurisdiction. And then if there's funding left over, we would go back down through that list again and fund additional projects. So that helps ensure that that funding is spread more evenly throughout the region. And with that, I will give things back to the chair, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very interesting item, and because it's a funding source associated with smart growth, which is tied to sustainability. So I am going to open it up to see if the working group has some questions or comments for staff on this presentation. Solana Beach.
Yeah, and on the capital projects, I know it mostly talks about infrastructure as it relates to right-of-way. How about replacement, like public parking for projects that have a mixed-use housing, commercial type project? Is that something that would be eligible for the parking structure, as an example, public parking structure?
We'll look into it a little bit because it's getting more granular in what the ordinance would
I know
provide.
I've raised that before. We have a project that's fully entitled that's causing a big gap and difficulty for us to get a developer online without. And I think HCD had talked about some funding for that type of work before, but we weren't eligible, or it was too late at the time that it came up. So that's certainly something I think that would be beneficial to a lot of projects, not just our jurisdiction, where you may be replacing some public parking and in our case, it was required by Coastal Commission to replace it. We can't just get rid of that public parking.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments from the working group or questions for staff? Yes, thank you. San Diego.
Thanks for the presentation. I have two questions. One of them is what you were talking about the ranked scoring and the jurisdictions. And then you had mentioned that you're trying to evenly spread it around the region. So I just wanted to get some clarification on what evenly around the region means.
I mean, not even, I guess. We're trying to prevent, as I mentioned, like one applicant from receiving a large volume of the funding. So trying to enable each of the jurisdictions as close to a level playing field as we can. So they'll still be scored independently. So the order of those projects might be different, but each applicant can receive one grant first, kind of in that descending order score, before we would go and fund the second application, third application from someone. And it's different in each category. So planning is not the same as capital, which is not the same as cap.
And just to add on to that, so they have to meet the minimum threshold as well. So it can't be like a project that scored like a 10. So it'll be similar to how we did the HAP Cycle 2 grants.
Okay, so my comment on that is that the city of San Diego represents a larger portion of the population, has a higher proportion of the RENA allocation. And so I would be strongly in favor of being able to have an equitable distribution as opposed to an equal distribution. My second question is related to the evaluation criteria that talks about the degree to which the project furthers the sustainable communities strategy, and wanted to see if you had any examples of what the direction to the evaluation members would be on that, because that seems very subjective to me. So wanted to get some more clarification on that particular evaluation criteria.
I was going to say, I don't think we've dug deeply into that yet, but that's what would be in the rubric. And it would specifically give you, as you said, for an evaluator who can score these objectively, what does that look like? So it would tell you specific items to look for in an application, but I don't think we have specific detail yet at this point.
We don't at this point.
Okay,
But we
no-
welcome any feedback.
Okay, no problem. So, yeah, so I just would encourage you to expand on that a little bit more because that particular criteria seems like it could be very subjective and affect the outcome of the scorings, depending on which person was scoring them.
Really good input. Thank you. El Cajon.
Thank you. Just curious about the consideration of equity, and we just mentioned equitable distribution. Was there any consideration, or is it being integrated into the process, having maybe bonus points for lower income communities, or where the infrastructure is maybe more needed for those capital projects?
We do have for both capital and planning, we do have an extra 5 points to the degree to which the project furthers equity and benefits disadvantaged communities. And we will also be bringing this to the Social Equity Working Group next week, so we expect to hear some additional feedback on that as well.
All right, good. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. So I was wondering about the more detailed scopes of work. What is going to be the threshold for that? And is that at time of submittal? Is there a tiered option where maybe there's further refinement at award? And then will there be any guidelines set out about amendments and what the process might be if there needs to be further refinement once awarded?
Yes, so part of it will be at time of submittal. So we'll kind of tweak the template that's there. So right now it's just it's one line really for each object. So it's hard to tell, well, what's underneath this? So it may not change the top, but it may be adding some sort of sub criteria underneath it or sub objectives of what that criteria is supposed to do. What will it be providing? It's mostly been on the planning side that's been the hardest to articulate. So it may be, you know, as we're bringing the funding recommendations up, we may need to work with an applicant and say, okay, now that we're gotten closer, what does this actually look like? It's hard, we know, to give instruction for folks on what to put, but that's kind of what we're thinking, is just expanding out what's in the scope today so that there's a little bit better delineation. And it also helps us with amendments, because sometimes we get into that with projects that something is shifted. Are we getting it too tight now we're triggering more amendments? We're trying to balance that. The intent is not to get more amendments out of it, but somewhere in between there. So we know exactly what is the project anticipated to deliver, and then describing what that is in the application, in the scope of work, and in the final grant that's awarded.
Sure. Yeah, I think we could support something that's detailed but flexible, just keeping in mind administrative, time and cost, staff time. It's already heavy, so we wouldn't want to unnecessarily add to that.
Absolutely.
Are there any other comments or questions? I do have two, and two that haven't already been addressed. One has to do with the performance measures that you had indicated that you're looking into. And if I understood it correctly, you're hoping to hone that a little bit when it comes to this cycle. You've already done 70 projects as a matter of record. And do you have any performance standards from those that you're starting with that will inform you as you move into developing performance standards to be part of this future funding?
We can, to the extent that there's data. That's a lot of this, is there hasn't been data. So what did it turn into? Especially on the planning side, we've seen that is if you develop a planning document, well, what was implemented 10 years later, 20 years later, like measuring some of these is really, really hard. We did try to get that from the auditor when we knew that this input was coming our way, was tell me, what have you seen around the country that we can kind of lean on? So I don't know that there's specific details. Some of what we've tried to do on our other grant programs that have been standing along longer is sort of asking the applicant and saying, what do you think this might turn into? So it may not be fully prescriptive. I want you to get this specific number, but sort of you tell us where your project is, what do you think it might turn into? And then holding folks to some threshold of that for implementation. So, because it's not across the board that we can come up with something easily, but to, you know, as much as we can, looking at old projects and trying to figure out what was there and kind of what numbers we can get. But also the environment's changed quite a bit from the last 20 years. So somewhere in between there, we should be able to hone in on something.
I think that's fair. As you look back and you look at what the merits are of the data and the outcomes from prior projects, I think that's good for anyone who's proposing on future work to understand what those metrics were. But if you have enough flexibility so that each proposal can define its own outcomes, I think that's maybe a good balance of both. So that'll be my comment on that. And maybe kind of aligned with this, but on slide 13, you identified what the evaluation criteria would be. And this may be just my lack of familiarity, but what is project feasibility? Efficient use of program funds and community engagement, but what could you give me a little more on what project feasibility actually, what is it you're looking for there?
Sure. So if you look in attachment 1 of the report, it has a little bit more information that's there. So feasibility is really the first one on the capital side, at least the major milestone is kind of self-explanatory. Where are you with milestones? The other two, the efficient use of program funds, is really looking at your scope, schedule, and budget, and can you implement that? We've seen a number of projects that have had frequent amendments. We've had a lot of frustration from our ITALK as well. They've had this question for the last decade of how many amendments is too many on a project. So this criteria B on the capital and A on the planning side is trying to get into that of like really looking at someone's scope of work and saying, can you actually deliver this based on where you are today and what folks know about project delivery? Is there something in there that maybe hasn't been thought of to try and prevent this either future amendments or dramatic changes, that sort of thing? That's what that's trying to get into. We'll have to kind of describe for an evaluator and an applicant as well, like what are the types of things that we're looking for, but that's really what that one is intended to do, is tie that scope back into the evaluation process and see, is this something that someone can do? For the most part, obviously things happen and you can't always control everything. And then community engagement, I think we kind of talked about this one a little bit, but this one is trying to get outreach throughout the life cycle of the project, making sure that that's happening on projects and how is that being incorporated. So it's not just done at one time, it's continuous. So even on a construction project, what does that look like when you're actually entering into construction? Is the community aware of what's happening to them? That sort of thing. That's what we're looking for. So that criteria on feasibility is looking at the entire sort of implementation of the project. What will that look like and how feasible is it today as you're reviewing an application?
Okay, thank you very much. One
More
yes.
question, sorry.
Yes.
Is there when do the funds need to be spent by once this is released and applied for? What's the schedule again?
So capital projects have 3.5 years. This is set by the board policy 35. So you have 3.5 years for capital and 3 years from planning from when the project first begins.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there's time for more questions if anyone has them. Yes, Encinitas.
So I see that the geographic constraint has been removed. So cities or jurisdictions that don't have mobility hubs or transit priority areas, so that is kind of now a level playing field.
Yes, but you will notice that it is part of the scoring criteria,
Mhm.
but you are eligible to still apply. So with a strong project, you can still easily be awarded.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. This looks like a great opportunity, and appreciate the feedback from the working group for you to use as you develop your thoughts. Tessa, are there any members of the public who wish to speak at this time?
Thank you, Chair. I have one public commenter on this item, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, as you're developing your thoughts, what you should be thinking about is, you know, where all of this kind of stuff stems from for smart growth, smart cities, reducing vehicle miles traveled and GHGs. It all comes down from the United Nations. If you haven't read Agenda 21 from the United Nations, you should do so and look into smart cities and what they're doing and how it's all about controlling resources, controlling the people and their movements, and keeping them in densely populated areas, and even bringing in things like geofencing. So I'm sure at some point you're going to be asked to do that, but it would behoove you to really look into what you're actually doing before you put that on the people, because you'll be enslaving yourself in the process. And you may think I'm crazy and I don't really care, but you should be looking into that stuff so that you have an actual you know, an understanding of what you're actually pushing that has nothing to do with the climate, that you have been hoodwinked and you've been sold a lie so that you push this, but in the process, you're enslaving yourself too.
And your time expired. That concludes the public comments.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for that. And we'll move right along to item number 4, Regional Housing Needs Allocation Update. I would like to introduce Tururi Faiola, Deputy Director for Sustainable Communities, and Thomas DeFranco, Regional Planner, who will present an overview of the HCD report, California's Housing Future 2040, the next Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, working group members. I'm going to, as the Chair said, Thomas and I are going to go over the recent report that was released by HCD related to the next cycle of RHNA, and we're hoping to be able to answer whatever questions we can with the information that has been made available today. But before we jump into talking about all of the what we've been able to learn and gain from the report, we did want to just give a brief reminder of the timeline and some of the information that has been shared. And apologies, the animation is a little slower than I thought. That has already happened over the last year. So if you may recall, when HCD started talking about RHNA reform, they kicked it off last year in March with a public webinar, and then it was followed up by a survey, as well as sounding board meetings, for which I do recognize that local city governments were not invited to those sounding board meetings, and that is, you know, something that we conveyed back to HCD. And then they were supposed to provide an update to the legislator on the results of all of their outreach. And we, through that process, also tried to communicate with you how things are moving along. And so here we are today, where they have in April just recently released their report to the legislator. But leading up to this, you know, SANDAG was trying to make sure that we were giving you as much information as we had, gathering your comments and feedback, and also taking that information to our executive committee, as well as the regional planning committee, to let them know what the comments were coming through from our working group members and from your staff, as well as some of the thoughts and comments that we at SANDAG have had in reviewing some of the different recommendations that HCD was bringing forward through their outreach process. So that brings us really to where we are right now, which is coming to you to give you an update on what that report that was released just this April. And then we're hoping to take your feedback and be able to continue to communicate this to our regional planning committee, as well as our executive committee this fall. So I think it was in March of this year, right, when HCD actually had a representative who came and spoke to our board of directors. Our board of directors has been very vocal in letting us know that they feel that there has been some feedback that they have for HCD through the RHNA process. This is not all of the things that they've said, but just a quick summary of some of the things that they've mentioned, from the lack of transparency that they feel is not there. There's a lack of information available when they're doing the determination process and giving us how they come up with our number for the region. There's also the frustration around like the lack of funding. I mean, it's really great. Stacey just reported to you all at the beginning of the meeting that we're getting, you know, most of our REAP funding back, but that's one of the first sources of funding that we've had to support implementation of our housing elements in the region. And so just kind of the lack there has been over the years for that actual implementation funding. And then really some of what the board feels is also frustrations around the lack of flexibility for local context, inability to adjust mid-cycle, local control. And then they really wanted to understand from the state auditor's recommendations how those are being integrated into the reports. So that was the feedback that we heard from our board that was given directly to HCD. Very shortly thereafter that meeting, they released the very next month their report that they've already submitted to the legislator. And so today we want to just walk you through that a little bit. And so Thomas here is going to go through that. But before I do, we just wanted to just give you a simple reminder of these were the guiding principles in which HCD had put forward when they started their RENA reform process and what they were looking to lead and guide them when they were doing the reform. So we just wanted to give you a reminder of these 6 areas. So the report, if you haven't dug into the many pages that there is with it, it's broken up into 3 different sections, and we'll walk through some of that with you today. But it's first starting off with recommendations that they're giving to the legislator to consider. Then it is policy considerations to the legislator, for future considerations. And then there's implementation efforts that HCD already has authority and to be able to actually change in terms of the RENA process. So Thomas is going to walk you through a couple of slides here that highlights those.
Thanks, Tori. So starting with our policy considerations to the legislature. So these 3, HCD identified these 3 policy considerations that include adjusting income distribution to better address the housing needs of all regions, exploring assigning units lost during state of emergency declaration to overall allocation, and exploring ways to clarify the RENA process and simplify the language in the statute. It's important just to remember that these will have no immediate impacts on SANDAG or the jurisdictions, but they kind of represent HCD signaling to state officials and local leaders that we should be continuing to discuss these policy considerations and that they may come up in the future in future HCD reports. We'll be continuing to track the legislature and discuss with our representatives in Sacramento to see if any of these items get brought up, but HCD didn't really provide any direct recommendations for any of these policies. The next section of the report, HCD did provide 10 recommendations to the legislature. These are specific recommendations that include state code, which HCD has provided, and reasonings for why HCD wants to see these changes. As stated previously, we're not going to go over each of these recommendations in great detail today, but in the attached materials, you can find a staff report that goes over the recommended changes and some of staff's considerations. And we'd also like to hear from you today of what your thoughts are. So these recommendations, just a real quick overview, include accounting for the housing needs of people experiencing homelessness, tying the regional housing need determination more closely to DOF or Department of Finance household projections, adjusting how populations living in group quarters are treated in the determination, further and balance the 5 statutory objectives of RENA, refine the appeals process to increase clarity, and improving the RENA and RTP SCS alignment. And of these recommendations, one of them actually has already been introduced into law or introduced as a bill by a San Diego Assembly member. So Assemblymember Chris Ward introduced AB 3093, which attempts to address policy recommendation number 1, accounting for housing needs of people experiencing homelessness. The proposed bill will create 2 new income categories, acutely low income and extremely low income, for the 7th cycle RENA and housing element process. The proposed bill would also require COGS or SANDAG to provide HCD the data on the housing needs of individuals experiencing homelessness within the determination process. And HCD provided some guidance on the types of data that SANDAG and COGS should be providing. It's been co-authored by Senator Blake Spear, another local political leader, and Governor Newsom has already indicated that if it's passed, he would immediately sign it into law. As an update, it's passed the Assembly and it's going through Senate committees right now, and it's expected that it will pass. I'd like to go back to the previous slide and just reminding everyone here that these are simply recommendations to the legislature, none of which can be implemented without legislation from Sacramento. And besides the previous bill, none of these proposals have current matching legislation that has been introduced.
And maybe I'll just add one thing, because I know you might be wondering the color difference. The purplish color compared to those that are not in purple on these lists are the ones that we're really wanting to make sure we dig into and that we fully understand. So that's what some of the color difference, and that correlates to the attachment that you have with your staff report.
Thanks, Tueri. So I will now go over HCD's future implementation efforts. These are process changes that HCD can make under their existing authority, and changes that we can all expect to see within the 7th determination, allocation, and housing element process. These changes include applying cost burden and overcrowded determination adjustment factors to existing households rather than projected, improving the precision of vacancy rate determination adjustment factor, refining the jobs housing determination adjustment factor, accounting for housing lost to vacation homes and short-term rentals, increasing transparency during the determination process, adjusting income distribution to better address the housing needs for all regions, adjust how populations living in group quarters are treated in the determination, and crediting a wider range of housing types in the APR, reducing allocation to the unincorporated areas outside of population centers, and improving technical assistance for the subregion process. Within the report and communications that SANDAG staff has had with HCD since this report's been released, HCD has stated that additional technical assistance and guidance will be provided as to how each of these implementation efforts will specifically impact the determination, the allocation, and the housing element process. And then also, as a reminder, in the attached report, we've provided some of staff's consideration for each of these future implementation efforts. So for next steps, staff will continue to bring more detailed discussion item to the Regional Planning Committee in summer of 2024, followed by a discussion item to Executive Committee in fall of 2024. And regular updates will be provided as more information, as we receive more information from HCD on next steps and any technical support that gets released. And I think lastly, today, that's the end of our presentation, but we are really interested in hearing what you all have to say about this report, and Tueri and I are prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tueri and Thomas. Are there questions from the working group or comments at this time? Yes, San Diego.
Thanks for the presentation. Provides a good summary of the report. I'm curious, I haven't read through all of the details of the report. If there was anything, we had submitted a letter. One of our recommendations was to look at the number of people housed versus the number of housing units produced. Was there any mention of that in the report?
Yeah, no, there wasn't. Instead of looking at units, look at it as people housed. That was your recommendation?
Correct.
Yeah. That was not in the report.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would just say that I would continue to strongly advocate for that approach because it is really important how many people we are planning for in terms of ensuring that we can attract families and have multi-generational living in our region. And then my second comment is on AB 3093 on the requirement of the proposed bill to account for acutely low income. It seems to zero in on the acutely low income category, which I think as a concept is really good. However, I do just think that we should all keep in mind that we don't zone for low income housing. We zone for housing, and then we put regulations in place that incentivize affordable housing. And I do have concerns about the way that the bill is written that kind of assumes that we are zoning for certain income categories, which we do not do. And I would have significant concerns with doing in terms of especially the concentration of poverty if you are particularly zoning for affordable housing. And then just another comment that I had on that, to the extent that I can advocate here for you to advocate to HCD as well, or to the legislature, because the bill is still pending, is that there's no clarification on how jurisdictions would be expected to implement this requirement in its housing element. And I would hate to get in a position where all of the jurisdictions are guessing what that looks like, and have a really hard time going back and forth. So my suggestion would be that HCD be directed to provide additional guidance to cities in the preparation of their housing elements. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll make sure to provide those comments also to our government relations team. I will say just briefly, we have heard some similar concerns throughout the state around what the comments you made today. So we'll continue to communicate that to our government relations team who works on providing feedback on these.
Thank you.
If I may,
Yes,
Madam Chair, as well, I agree with what San Diego's saying. I also think that it would be helpful if whatever guidelines HCD comes out with, to have them in advance of our preparation of the housing elements. I know that the last cycle we ran into guidelines coming in out after the deadline that were applied to local jurisdictions, which made it really difficult, not just for us, but many of the San Diego, much of the San Diego region in getting their housing elements certified. So I would certainly encourage any guidelines to be out before the RENA is done.
Thank you. Staff, if I could just interject right now and ask, because I'm thinking as we're hearing really, really good comments, how are the comments from the Sustainability Working Group Committee brought up through the SANDAG process to be made evident for the state? Can you explain that? Because I'm just wondering, you know, we're one voice, but is there a stronger voice out of regional planning, or where do we stand as far as how our comments get brought forward?
So I guess in terms of this board structure, we are taking these comments to our regional planning committee and our executive committee, and we do have a legislative program that the board and the executive committee have approved, and housing is part of that. So the comments that you bring to us today, we will work collaboratively with our public affairs and government relations team to be able to communicate that to any of the legislators on any laws that are being proposed. In terms of HCD, we do pass along all of our recommendations. They have a email site that's fully dedicated towards the 7-cycle RENA reform. And so we communicate with them through their avenue of communication, which right now is email, on the concerns that we want to have. And I will say that I did personally reach out to the HCD project manager to ask if they would be hosting any public meetings or different things to allow your voices and others to be heard directly. At this time, they do not have anything planned, and they encouraged all of us, including SANDAG, to communicate that via their email. So we are going to communicate here and through our policy committees. And then if our board would like to make recommendations, or one of our planning committees to do something further as a letter or other communication, we'll certainly do so.
All right. And so this, the recommendations out of this committee working group is one way to move our thoughts forward. I think perhaps there's a sense that the voice hasn't been heard in the past. And also there's maybe a sense that there hasn't been an invitation to participate. So I think overcoming that gap is really important, and understanding where the most value where our voice can have the most value in giving feedback. It's just at this juncture I say this. I think it sounds like it's probably at every juncture. I don't want to just call this one out specifically, but I'd like to see that our voice has some value, and get guidance on what the best ways to move that forward for consideration are in the future. I think I might have seen an interest in another comment. Yeah.
Karen Brindley, City of Del Mar. I'd just like to support the comments from Solana Beach and the City of San Diego, as well as yours, relative to just the overall, I think, timeline as it relates to, you know, receiving the HCD guidelines or any information as it relates to the RENA reform, with sufficient time for each of our jurisdictions to individually be able to digest it, but then collectively, as we initiate that 7th cycle, process that we have a good level of understanding of what's expected and through these guidelines, what the changes really are. I know my jurisdiction had several concerns regarding methodology, and which I don't need to litigate here, but wanting to ensure that there's transparency in the process. That was one of the comments that was heard at that board meeting, but wanted to just support that. In addition, I saw that in your timeline, as far as presenting back to the board, I think it's in the fall.
September. So we'll bring
September.
your feedback to the September Regional Planning Committee. And that is also the executive committee would be the following week.
Okay, and is it the intention to take the information from this collective effort and be able to further evaluate that and then bring it forward?
Yes, we want to take your feedback and provide this summary in addition to your feedback to the Regional Planning Committee, and then take their feedback, yours collectively, to the executive committee of the board.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there was opportunity for this group to be able to understand what's moving forward to those respective committees and the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Carlsbad.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions and maybe comments. So the first one, digging into the acutely low income category. Do you know, or does the report say if they're going to use the same methodology of just saying that's a higher density, speaking to Heidi's comments, how we would incorporate that into our housing elements?
We don't have further information unless you have something, Tom. Yeah, we don't have further information at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, like how those programs would be implemented, they didn't receive any sort of guidance to that.
Okay, so if we just kind of straight lined it from how they do it now at the very low income, et cetera, but especially for smaller jurisdictions, ones outside of the urban core, I mean, we're already getting to densities that are just not feasible. It is all just a paper exercise. So hopefully there's some additional guidance or some different methodology for those extremely acutely low individuals other than just higher density. The second is about the measure on here about accounting for it's the vacation homes and the short-term rentals. Do they provide any detail on how a jurisdiction is supposed to track that?
They are not going to be asking the jurisdictions to be providing that data directly. There is a methodology that they described in the report as to how they are going to determine what that number is, but it's not like they're going to ask SANDAG or you all to be reporting on the number of short-term vacation rentals or vacation homes through this process. So I can't remember exactly what the methodology does, but in the report, it does go over that.
Okay, because the concern here is it makes it sound like it would be a whole new program that jurisdictions would have to undertake to do tracking. It's additional time and costs, something additional from the state. For Carlsbad, we do have short-term vacation rental licenses. We could do that, vacation homes, so each jurisdiction would be different.
I was interested, or it was interesting to see in the report, because when I first read through it, that's what I thought they were going to do, was say, okay, each jurisdiction, now you have to provide this data. But they have a separate methodology using, I can't remember the data set, to determine what that number is and then how it would be implemented. So,
well, and I think then us being able to review whatever that methodology is and comment on it would be requested.
Sure.
All right, sorry about that. Yes, Oceanside.
I agree with Rob from Carlsbad on the short-term rentals comment. I'm wondering if the end in mind for that implementation effort is for the city to make up for the loss of housing from using those homes as short-term rentals.
I think that is what HCD is kind of saying, that this is now going to be taken into consideration for the amount of housing units that you now need to produce, or permit, I should say.
Well, I know Oceanside would really stand against that. So there's many cities here that use short-term rentals, and that would make it even more difficult to achieve the RHNA numbers.
Good questions. Encinitas.
So I think unanimously, I think we all agree that it's going to be difficult to implement and there needs to be a consistency in how each jurisdictions implement it. And we don't have that guidance. So I think we all agree that it's pretty difficult. One of the other things is that the comment on slide 9 about HCD requiring data on housing of individuals and families experiencing homelessness. For those of us that are working in that space, that's really difficult because they could be homeless in Encinitas today, and then they could be in Solana Beach and Del Mar, and and the point in time count is like the RTFH is like what I call the SANDAG of homelessness, and it's one time. So like what data source would we even use for that? And why are I'm super opposed to that because I just think it's bad data. We don't have the data, and it's just one more bureaucracy that is going to be super difficult to even quantify. So I personally, I don't think that's helpful at all.
HCD acknowledges that the data is incomplete. So in the report, they acknowledge that this data is difficult to get, it's incomplete. They give 3 data sets that could theoretically be used to help develop this. One of them is the point in time count data that could be incorporated. They didn't really provide any further clarification besides look out for additional technical support, and we will be, following up with that.
And herein lies the problem, right? There's not any kind of guidance of how to do this, right? And it makes it more difficult. And now with these 2 lower income house or categories, which we don't control, right? We can only zone for the land. We can't control. And the existing density bonus law is for, if you can get 15%, very low, but there's no new housing law that would help us have incentives for developers to even implement these 2 new categories, right? So there's not that density bonus law that could help incentivize us to meet our RENA. Oh, and one other thing I did need to add, because I was talking to Carrie about it earlier, is the whole idea of transparency and how this is determined, which by the way, doesn't seem like it was very transparent. But it would be really helpful because we have some planning commissioners and other people that are challenging how the RENA is determined. And it would be really great to have some methodology that is consumable for the decision makers and public, right? Not just, 20 pages of reports but some methodology and determination, and also some data on the challenges, because I think there's a perception among decision makers that we are somehow in bed with HCD and we're just like doing nothing to allow this density to occur. And so, it would be great if we could have the data on how many appeals in San Diego County were made and if any of them were even granted. Like that would speak volumes for certain, I think a lot of communities that, public and decision makers think that, we're just not doing anything. So that'd be really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, good comments. Was there another? Yes, Oceanside.
In that vein with Encinitas, I was wondering if you could please explain on slide 8 a little bit more about number 8, refine the appeals process to increase clarity and efficiency. Do you have any more details? I'm sorry if I missed that.
No, we didn't go over that in the report. Specifically, I think there was some confusion in the last process about what you could appeal. And so I don't remember exactly what it is that they have put into this recommendation, but it's the goal of it is to just make it so that everyone is better understands what it is that they can specifically appeal within the determination methodology.
Yeah, and I think it's for the determination, but it's also for when we're doing our allocation process, because there's an appeals process throughout that. And throughout the state, there was probably some lack of clarity on what is eligible for appeals versus not. And so it's just really providing more clarity into that process.
Just to follow up, could we get the data on if there have been any appeals that have been approved in our region? That would be really powerful.
We will, in our region, we could certainly for our region, yes.
And certainly I'll entertain more questions. Yes, National City.
Sure. Thank you, Carlos Aguirre, City of National City. I think one of the pieces in the analysis, it's not only the regional housing need, but also the transportation need. And I think that a great audience that the state could kind of survey is the latest recipients of affordable housing in TOD areas and areas with less parking. I think the feedback that we've gotten from residents is, from a change in behavior standpoint, is that really the transportation that's provided, the amenities don't suit their needs in terms of getting to jobs, getting to education, just tending to their household needs. And so what we found is the most recent TOD projects that we've done, we still have an average number of cars that exceeds those that were built for the project because of regulatory relief from AB 2097. I think it's impactful because it's affecting the quality of life of communities like National City, and our incentive to continue on this mode of building additional affordable housing in our community. So we really do have to look at the entire infrastructure, the entire picture, and the true local community concerns for additional affordable housing, and dollar for dollar what is needed in terms of transportation support and meeting the needs of those families that are living in affordable housing that's being required through these policies. Because at the end of the day, if we're not building housing that's amenable to their specific needs, we're not succeeding, and we're affecting the quality of life of every community. Thank you.
That was a poignant statement. Thank you, Carlos. And in my opinion, I just want to add a statement too, that the seeing to the needs of the larger community, I think is a lot of merit. And I know that's the sentiment. One thing that's always been missing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing is a solution to affordable housing as well, which seems to be missing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything on NOAA.
There wasn't anything on that within this report specifically.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, which is a gap that I think I just want to make the point that it's a gap that addresses the same concern of affordability, very obviously missing. And the merits of preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing is part of our solution. So for it to be such a missing element says a lot. So any other comments at this time? Thank you. Are there any comments from the public?
I have one public comment on this item, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's just sad to see how much housing is needed and how many people are waiting for housing, and to see all of the, guidelines, policies, and procedures that have been implemented to, somehow pretend to mitigate, climate change is actually keeping people from being able to have housing in a time period that would be, helpful to them. Instead, people are leaving in droves. And then, the county still benefits because people have to pay their, when they sell their house, the money comes in. But, it's just sad to see that instead of just doing whatever we can to provide housing, it's like all these roadblocks get set up and, nothing gets done because it takes so long. And, you have to, either pay more to mitigate like VMTs or, whatever, and like giving density bonuses. But it's like, you see what New York looks like. This is not what people are wanting to have. And that's what it's heading towards. And it's never going to save the planet.
That concludes the public comments on this item.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tiori and Thomas. So we'll go to item 5, Housing Acceleration Program and Regional Early Action Planning Grants updates. And I'd like to introduce again Thomas DeFranco, as he will present an update on SANDAG's Housing Acceleration Program, which is funded through the state's Regional Early Action Planning Grants of 2019 and 2021.
Thanks, Chair. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Thomas DeFranco. I'm a regional planner on SANDAG's Sustainable Communities team. And today I'm here to provide you an update to SANDAG's Housing Acceleration or HAP program. SANDAG launched our HAP program with Regional Early Action Planning or REAP grant funding from the state. REAP funding was a one-time grant funding for planning activities that accelerate housing production and facilitate compliance in jurisdictions' implementation of the sixth cycle of the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. In 2019, the California State Legislature passed AB 101. This bill provided one-time grant funding through HCD to MPOs like SANDAG to support local jurisdictions' efforts in implementing their housing elements. SANDAG was able to secure $6.8 million in formula funding under REAP 1.0, which facilitated the development and implementation of our REAP 1.0 objectives. So today I'm going to be focusing on what we accomplished with REAP 1.0. Initially, to determine how REAP 1.0 funding would best benefit our region, SANDAG engaged in member agencies and stakeholders to better understand the housing challenges and identify areas where we could best support the local jurisdictions. The word cloud up top shows these key themes that we heard, including funding, education, training, and collaboration. And this feedback helped us develop the Housing Acceleration Program. Our HAP strategy, seen on the screen, which was published in 2022, outlines the goals, policies, and actions to accelerate affordable, fair, and sustainable housing production across the San Diego region. And it's a guide to help SANDAG address the housing crisis and reach our regional housing and climate goals. And it includes near-term and continuous implementation actions. So SANDAG's REAP 1.0 strategy includes 3 core activities: local jurisdiction support, data analysis and policy resources, and regional initiatives. And I'll provide more details about each of these strategies on the following slides. So to begin, a large component of SANDAG's REAP 1.0 funded activities is grant funding for the local jurisdictions. We wanted to provide direct financial support to the local jurisdictions, and in 2022, we launched our HAP Cycle 1 grant program and awarded $1.9 million directly to jurisdictions for 7 planning projects that accelerate housing production and facilitate implementation of the 6th cycle RHNA. In order to further accomplish our core strategy of local jurisdiction support, we also developed our Technical Assistance or TA program. The TA program is designed with multiple components seen on the screen, which cater to the varying needs and capacities of our jurisdictions. I'll highlight a few of the components of the TA program and offer examples of the toolkits and data resources that we've created through this program. A significant portion of these resources so far have been focused on supporting the implementation of the new recently adopted state laws. For example, we've developed a toolkit for AB 2011 and SB 6, which provides an overview of these bills along with implementation checklists for city staff. In addition to these resources, SANDAG developed in-person training sessions and online webinars where staff can openly discuss their challenges and collaborate comfortably. It's important to emphasize that engagement, communication, and collaboration were integral components of this program and drive the continuous development of the resources that we provide to support staff in dealing with the ever-changing housing policy and regulatory landscape. To support our next core strategy of data analysis and policy resources, SANDAG developed our Housing Policy and Planning Tool, or HPPT. SANDAG's HPPT is meant to be our online housing resource hub for policymakers, staff, and the public to support the implementation of housing elements. Since we started development of this tool last year, we've been actively engaging with jurisdiction staff to develop this in a way that supports your needs. And we currently have 7 different tools or products that you can see on the screen, like affordable housing case studies, our ADU report, our RHNA dashboard, and anti-displacement strategies. The third strategy of our REAP 1.0 HAP is regional initiatives, which includes studies, education, leadership, and funding opportunities to accelerate housing production. Through SANDAG's regional initiatives, we've built out a strong educational programming like our Housing Policy Leadership Academy and Housing Policy Bootcamp. The Housing Policy Leadership Academy, or HPLA, is a 10-session course that provides a forum for industry leaders and policy professionals to explore the relationship between policy, planning, and housing development. And we just recently graduated a cohort this past May. And the Housing Policy Bootcamp is a Shark Tank-like policy development program that provides HPLA graduates the opportunity to dive deeper into the leadership and coalition building strategies for specific policy proposals. The first policy bootcamp just finished last week, and there were 4 really exciting policy proposals that you hopefully will hear more about. Additionally, we've also held 6 policy forums that have been open to the public that have focused on general housing policy issues and trends. You can see them on the screen here, and over 1,500 people have attended these events total. And to round out our regional initiatives, our capital mapping and regional value capture study have identified funding sources and unique finance mechanisms to support housing production throughout the region and are available to our jurisdictions and the public. So that concludes an overview of our work with REAP 1.0, and now I'll switch gears to tell you about some of the work we're doing with REAP 2.0 and provide you the latest status update as to the availability of those funds. So REAP 2.0 has 3 very specific objectives: accelerate infill development, affirmatively further fair housing, and reduce VMT. But these objectives are somewhat on hold. So as you heard my colleague Stacy Cooper say earlier today, on May 30th of 2023, the California Department of Housing and Community Development approved SANDAG's REAP 2.0 application, formally committing $43 million to our region. But since that time, SANDAG has moved forward with those proposed uses, including a suballocation of $12.3 million for 15 transformative projects to local jurisdictions through our HAP Cycle 2 grant program. However, on January 10th, 2024, Governor Gavin Newsom announced a proposed state budget that would cut $1.2 billion in total funding for housing programs, which included a $300 million reversion, or half of the REAP 2.0 program. HCD, who administers the REAP 2.0 program, subsequently announced that they will only be reimbursing funding for 25% of that initial award until the state budget is finalized, which should be happening in the next couple of weeks. So last week, the California legislature passed the Budget Act of 2024, AB 107, which looks to minimize some of the cuts that the governor proposed with REAP 2.0. The legislature's budget includes $250 million of that $300 million, which was cut for REAP 2.0, which results in a net reduction of only $50 million to the program's $600 million allocation. So AB 107 satisfied the legislature's constitutional deadline to approve a budget, but there's still going to be potential negotiation with the governor, which means that a final agreement on spending details will be signed and released by July 1st. So given HCD's direction and with the uncertainty of the budget implications, some of the initiatives that I'm about to go over are somewhat on hold. But like Stacy said, although the pause is currently in effect, we're optimistic that we're going to receive a decent amount of the REAP 2.0 funding with the legislature's indication that it's a priority. So with that being said, I'll provide now a quick overview of our efforts. SANDAG also engaged in robust outreach during 2022 to develop our REAP 2.0 program priorities. And based on the input received from local jurisdictions, elected official, affordable housing developers, and tribal nations, we organized our planning implementation activities into 4 main areas: local jurisdiction support, affordable housing programs, transit agency partnership, and tribal partnership. The first proposed use is continued local jurisdiction support. So this program planned to provide grants and continued TA for efforts to implement local housing elements and accelerate the development of affordable housing. One of the largest activities is our HAP Cycle 2 grants, which I mentioned earlier. And eligible projects for these grants included updating of planning documents, conducting infrastructure studies, and preparing multimodal plans and programs. The capital project category seeks to fund infrastructure investments and further accelerating housing production. Additionally, our technical support, sorry, I'm gonna go back real quick. Additionally, the funded activities included the continuation of our technical support program, our technical assistance program, which was, everyone said they wanted to keep that. So this program will be continued regardless of the ongoing budget negotiations, and we're hoping to receive feedback from you all today on how we can make that program more impactful for the jurisdictions. The second activity is affordable housing development programs. Through this program, SANDAG was planning to establish an evergreen regional housing trust fund of $15 million to be leveraged with funding from other partners to directly support the finance and development of affordable housing. In addition to the trust fund, SANDAG wanted to allocate funding to support coordination on regional grant applications like ASIC, analysis of additional housing finance models, and evaluating opportunities for development on public lands. Under the third activity, our transit agency partnerships, SANDAG was collaborating with MTS and NCTD to support activities that specifically advance the redevelopment of land at their transit stations into affordable housing. Our partnership also included a funding for workforce housing for transit workers study, which is currently on hold. The fourth and final activity is our tribal partnership work. SANDAG, as we all know, the SANDAG region contains 17 federally recognized tribes, the most of any county in the US, and each tribe has unique housing needs that have never really been addressed before. The $2 million allocation will complement each tribe's existing housing programs to meet both their current and future needs. SANDAG is working closely with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to further develop this program and assure that they are planning and building housing for their community. So what's next with our HAP program? Right now, our team is concluding our REAP 1.0 activities and we'll be finalizing and submitting our closeout reports to HCD. And additionally, and most importantly, our team's going to continue to work with our leaders in Sacramento to advocate for the appropriation of housing funding in this year's state budget. And like I previously stated, our team is currently in the development of the scope for our continued technical assistance program. And so we would appreciate any feedback that you could give us. We know that we sent out the survey towards the end of our first round of technical assistance, and you guys gave us some great feedback in that process. So any additional feedback that you can provide today would be lovely. And that concludes my presentation on the work we're doing for SANDAG's Housing Acceleration Program. And I'm available to answer any questions and hear your suggestions.
All right, good. Thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. So I'd like to look around the room and see if there's any working group members who would like to ask a question. Encinitas, yes.
It looked like between REAP 1 and 2, there was just under 50 million. And if my number's correct, you awarded just under 24 million. Is that correct?
For both the REAP 1 and 2 HAP cycle grants?
Yeah.
I believe that sounds correct.
So did we all just not ask for enough funding, or where does the rest of the money go?
So the rest of the money is going to the programs that we listed, like the rest of the programs that were listed in there. The HAP cycle 1 and cycle 2 grants were just part of the allocated funding.
And yes, they were both undersubscribed. For round 1, we had allocated $3 million. We only received 1.9 million in applications. And for REAP 2, we had allocated $16 million, and we only got 12.3.
So I think one suggestion would be having that grant writing support, because I know there's an option for technical staff, but really it's difficult to utilize that because having someone come in that doesn't have any knowledge of the zoning and general plans, it takes so much time to get them up to speed to really help. I think a better allocation would be helping write grant applications, for example, because that's the biggest constraint is just time.
Thank you.
Yeah, good input. Solana Beach?
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate SANDAG's efforts for the planning technical assistance. We certainly were able to take advantage of that. But I think it speaks to the fact that we underutilize the amount of funds that were available, speaks to, I think, the need for actual capital funds to help actually build housing. So I'd like to see some more emphasis on getting those types of funds to build housing. I don't know if there's any metrics as it relates to based on that technical planning of how many units are hoped to be achieved based on completion of the planning efforts by all the jurisdictions, but I think that would be helpful as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, San Diego County.
Thank you for the presentation and update. And Stacy, I think you mentioned that you'd be reaching out to the jurisdictions that received the HAP grants. Do you anticipate going to the kind of 30% revised submittals, or do you think there might be any opportunity to go back to what was originally submitted?
Yeah. So we're waiting for the signature. But if we do get We're not anticipating getting our full amount of the 43, but we are anticipating getting a large amount. The first thing that we would go back and do is fund the local jurisdictions that were awarded funding. So yes, if we have the funding, yes, we could go back to the original amount that you had asked for. Our one concern and the thing we want to talk to everybody about is the expenditure deadline still has not changed. So we would have to move forward as if December 31st, 2025 is the expenditure deadline. So it would be talking through what's actually feasible and possible with the reduced timeframe.
Yes. Delmar.
Yes, thank you once again. That was a great question. When we were allocated some funds, and the last discussion that I understand is that January we can go back and get reimbursed for funds expended from January on. Well, of course, we had a project that was a housing element program that needed to be implemented, so we budgeted with the expectation of getting reimbursed. Is that a steadfast? Is it? I mean, I know at this point it's January, but is there the opportunity to go prior to January?
We'll have to talk about that. I don't think so because NTPs would not have been issued before January had this all not happened. But we'll double check and get back to you.
Right. San Diego.
So on the topic of the deadline, has there been any talk about an extension from the legislature to the December 2025 deadline?
So right now, all the advocacy efforts have been towards restoring the REAP funding. So there's hesitancy in going and saying we really need these funds, and then we need more time. So the first step is we're advocating to get the REAP funding back. And then I think the second step from sort of like CalCog would be to hopefully get an expenditure deadline. Extended expenditure deadline. But as of now, we have to move forward as if it's not going to change.
We appreciate your efforts to get our funding. Thank you.
National City.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank staff at SANDAG for really providing full disclosure since day one with these issues about reversion. I know it's impacting those that are in the pipeline for funding, but we applied for REAP 1.0, 2.0. We've been able to do a lot of innovative things with the 1.0 funding, and we're looking forward to being able to get the 2.0 funding. The application is not that difficult, but SANDAG is there to support. But we thank you for just following through and making sure you guys give us full support on and advocating for the funding, because it is necessary for us to do very innovative projects in our jurisdictions. Thank you.
I'd like to jump in with a question. There was something I wasn't aware of that was presented, and it was titled the Evergreen Affordable Housing Fund. And is that something new in this REAP 2.0?
Yeah, so this was one of our proposed uses was affordable housing programs, and SANDAG was working with the San Diego Foundation. And we were putting together an agreement to give them $15 million for an evergreen affordable housing fund, trust fund. We were in the process of developing that program when we heard about the state budget cuts, so that had been put on hold. We were not expecting to be able to move forward with that because even with the 50% and funding the jurisdictions and some of the other things we had committed to, we would not have been able to. So now we're kind of in a wait and see of what the final budget looks like. And if we do have available funding, we could hopefully move forward with that. And that would be for affordable housing developers in the region.
Right. That seems to have a lot of merit. Does some of how you position moving forward depend on the feedback you get from us and from others at this point? Well, like how you are able to present the highest priorities for funding, and so you said 15 million for this one. And so is this a program that's not really a high priority, so it wouldn't get funding? Or are you thinking then if there's less funding, most of the programs then would be hit equally?
So initially, and I mean, this is up for discussion, our first thought was we were going to fund the local jurisdictions, the money that we had awarded them. So we had awarded $12.3 million that had been awarded to the jurisdictions. We just unfortunately, before their program could get started, had cut that back. The other ones had not taken off. So anything that we had already instituted would be first priority because we had promised that money to the local jurisdictions. So once we find out what our final amount is, we can go back and figure out what we can move forward with. But our local jurisdictions were our top priority in that.
Sure, great. I understand that. Anything else from the working group? And so, SANDAG clerk, are there any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We have one public commenter on this item, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that we talk about like housing acceleration when there isn't housing being built. It's just like, I don't know if there's a disconnect with reality and what's really going on in the community, but you know, just because we use these words and we create these programs doesn't mean that anything's actually being done to provide housing. And it's like, again, I mean, it's sad to just see all the things that have to be implemented, and you may or may not give somebody a permit because they may or may not reduce VMTs enough, or, you know, do the density the way that you guys want. So, I mean, you know, when you set up all these hoops in order to get funds, you know, a lot of people aren't going to meet that requirement unless they, you know, follow all of these implementations that you have brought down. I understand that it comes from the state as well, but I just don't understand how we can constantly, like, just because you use that word acceleration doesn't mean it's actually happening. And all we do is just try and, you know, make the public think that we're doing all these things to provide housing when in fact we're in a deficit of housing, and it just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
And that concludes the public comments.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item number 6, and that is adjournment and upcoming meetings. And so I just want to remind the working group that our next Sustainable Communities Working Group meeting will be held on September 9th from 1:30 to 3:30 here in the SANDAG boardroom. And also as a reminder, if any working group member has a suggestion for future topics or items for the upcoming year, please email Sarah or Chesley with those ideas. Oh, September 19th, I stand corrected on our next meeting. Then that concludes our meeting today. We are adjourned. Thank you.